After all of the hype we got that. Adrian Newey's first car with Aston Martin is here and, only 4 laps in. Yeah, Lance Stroll barely got to drive the thing, and if I hear you typing a comment saying, "Oh, it's just testing, bro," so help me, but optics in F1 matter. And Aston Martin really loves that kind of stuff. But the nature of the public-private test has certainly given us plenty to talk about, such as the arrival of the first Adrian Newey-led Aston Martin F1 car, albeit with considerable oversight from other big-name engineers and designers, let's not forget that. Remember, this team and all other teams are not one-man bands. There are plenty of women attached to those bands too. And whilst the car itself is incredibly unique, and the only car to elect to voluntarily just go, "I'm Batman," the stuff around it has been not nearly as polished as Papa Stroll would have liked. And it really gives off an Aston Martin that has now started to get a little bit of a hangover for all of the euphoric debauchery they've been plastered with for the last 2.5 years since they announced the Honda deal. And after the Tokyo Motor Show, they've actually now realised, "Oh damn, this is a pretty big task that I gave for my boy." The reality has hit this team, let's just say that. And whilst Japanese business etiquette for ceremonies and instances like this have a degree of humility and realism baked in, much less hype-driven than we're used to in the West, as well as seeing Stefano Domenicali again insisting that this year will be a showcase in technical and engineering brilliance, it wasn't something that got me nodding softly and vibing accordingly. Not nearly as much as Aston Martin's first interview with Honda Racing lead Koji Watanabe. I understand that that's Aston Martin's website. There has to be a degree of copium attached to it, that they have to be waxing lyrical about the organisation, but the stuff that Watanabe-san was saying made a lot of sense. And the stuff we heard at the presentation at the Tokyo Motor Show made a lot of sense. But the overall aura I was getting was that this bunch of people did not want to be here, that this was basically a publicity stunt. It wasn't something that was exuding confidence to me. And the enormity of the task at hand was evident with the original revelation that the team would only be present for Thursday and Friday at the specific shakedown around the Circuit de Catalunya. Out of all the teams out there, Aston Martin is probably the showiest around, so for something like this to befall them, because they usually like to flex their assets, their personnel and their prospect really hard. So the more visible than planned rollout ends with just 5 laps, a speed-limited car, potentially, and Lance walking away from a stranded AMR26. Not the image that they wanted, but don't worry about that, because the official F1 summary video for Day 4 didn't mention the stoppage at all. Not a word. Once again, like with the Hadjar incident being a small off, Formula 1 is very keen to just say, "Everything is fine! The cars are fine! The engines are fine!" And look, I'm not writing off Aston Martin's season here, I really am not, but for this team that really likes to flaunt itself, these opening few paragraphs weren't exactly ideal. So for Fernando, he has to work his magic and just pound in the laps constantly. And based on the timings that we're getting so far and the laps he's been able to accrue, he's doing a lot better than Lance was able to do. But as first impressions go, it was awkward to say the least. Significant, absolutely, but certainly not smooth. Oh, come off it, Law. That's the point of the shakedown, to get the bugs out of the way and understand the basic instincts of the car. Yeah, absolutely. But when you've got the likes of Mercedes clocking up 500 plus laps in their works car with minimal difficulty, and even George Russell able to lean on the car a little bit to show a little bit of pace, with Andrew Shovlin, their guy, claiming they've sorted out the basics and Bahrain will be all about setup optimization. Yeah, that's a very big, stark comparison. And then you've got even Red Bull Ford exceeding expectations, surprising even themselves, with Racing Bulls bringing up the majority and Red Bull going out today. The total lap count for Red Bull Ford, considering we had no clue how good they will be, has actually been very impressive, right up there with Ferrari, and Ferrari had one extra team to be able to add to that lap tally. So you gotta really give Milton Keynes their due here. And even Audi has been able to break into the triple figures, albeit barely, so it'll be a very tall order for Honda to be able to get a representative amount of laps when Mercedes, Honda and Red Bull Ford have been able to accrue much more. I'm not going doom and gloom here, but maybe Williams were smart to skip this test. Why rush out a car you don't fully believe in, only to risk showing it off to the wrong kind of audience? Sure, they've been pasted with plenty of memes and jokes for this decision, but a week on from that call, the intensity of the PR backlash has begun to reduce somewhat. And then comes along Aston Martin to take some of the limelight away, or should that be British Racing Greenlight, or Blacklight because they're all black, and the team produces this. And them, like the proud peacocks they are, show that their car, the AMR26, is pretty spicy. And it looks spicy in a very specific way, because it looks like Aston read the same rulebook as everyone else and then chose violence. And the quickest tells are the ones even non-engineers can spot from a few photos. The bodywork here is pinched like it's been vacuum sealed. The side pod area looks almost insultingly minimal, and the talk of rear suspension elements being attached to the rear wing pylon, that takes me back. You recall that old Top Gear episode where they are very much going into the minutiae of engines, and then Richard Hammond goes, "Oh, there's a manifold!" As in he was about to have a trouser accident. And I can easily imagine that many engineering and technically minded F1 fans out there had plenty of trouser accidents of their own. And Gary Anderson's first reaction basically screams the same message, that this looks extreme and pushed right to the limit with a zero sidepod idea taken to a depth that makes him wonder where the radiators could even live. And that's why the delay on Thursday mattered a lot. Because sure, a late car isn't automatically a slow one, but sometimes it could be a sign that they kept the car back because the last iteration was worth more than the laps you'd lose. And given Adrian Newey is not only the car's designer but the team principal and he can call the shots, this does seem very on brand. And then there's Racing News 365 reporting that the delay in the debut stemmed from specific inconsistencies Newey identified between simulator readings and wind tunnel data, a correlation issue. And that is something that Aston Martin has been very familiar with for the last couple of years, and that can easily send them completely off course when it comes to aerodynamic data and upgrades. 2023 started off strong, then went wildly off course. 2024 started off okay, but then went completely south really quickly around the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. But needless to say, Adrian wants to ensure that that same phenomena doesn't happen again, that whatever they've got remains relatively consistent and only improves. And that's exactly what Williams are trying to figure out to make sure that their correlation remains absolutely consistent as best as they can possibly get with their somewhat outdated equipment and their new equipment not yet fit for purpose. It's yet further proof to me that fixing the simulator and making it really representative to the actual car is going to be crucial this year. Or maybe the concept has wound up being so sensitive that it requires very subtle shifts to get it into that sweet spot. In short, I think you know where I'm getting at here, it might have this car a very narrow operating window. Does that sound very familiar to you? Almost Red Bullish? And that would explain a lot without needing to really dip into the spanner as often as you would think here. They had to make absolutely sure that everything was peachy and that whatever data they get here is actually going to be representative and properly used. If they went all guns blazing on Thursday and then really wrecked the car, then what hope could they have for Friday? At least now, Alonso's out on the track as we speak and putting in the laps somewhat quickly. And all of this doesn't mean that they're going to be behind the competition for good. It just means that right now they are behind in the narrative like Williams are. So what happened with the car? Well, we don't know. Formula One will just act like it never happened. Maybe an internal fault triggered a shutdown to protect Friday's running or something. Because even McLaren has lost time due to a fuel issue. It happens. But Aston's version of this hurts more because of what they chose to show the world. The moment you roll out a radical shape, more radical than anything else that we've seen, you're begging people to interpret every single bump in the road as a verdict on your philosophy, instead of a normal January gremlin. That's the tax you pay for being interesting, and going the Batman route is definitely interesting. The car packaged so tightly that understandably Aston Martin would set really conservative targets for the test, as in really not going all out at all to make sure they don't break anything, so that means they don't turn up at Bahrain with limited parts. Again, another potential reason why Williams chose to skip out the test entirely. And all of this checking out with reports that Aston Martin had imposed upon themselves a speed limit that they wouldn't be going full out with their power unit or their car. So the times we may get from this car could be even less representative than the other teams. That gamble can absolutely work, but it can easily punish you instantly. Cooling is a really big issue to try and fix, and with a really tight package like that, hotspots could easily be found. So the moment you find one, you just tell Lance, stop the car right now! Because if they didn't do that, that part of the car could easily be burnt to the crisp, and they may not have any spares to hand, so they wouldn't really get any running at all, and they would have gone to all of that effort to get everything shipped there. I can imagine that it was a very late night from the engineer's perspective to try and troubleshoot that problem. And then we've got that image of Lance Stroll walking away, basically on the phone saying, Dad, my toy broke! Okay, I'll get the spanner out for this bit and I'll widen the aperture as I talk, but What we saw with Aston Martin was a denial to us all about getting to understand the initial behavioural characteristics of the AMR26, because that's the whole point of a shakedown. You are meant to try and understand what the car is like, what are its foibles, what are its quirks, what are the things that you can easily patch out with an upgrade, and what are the things that you're just going to have to live with for the entirety of the season, because it's baked in to the very core. And I can understand how everyone felt crestfallen having waited all day for this car to come out. It then comes out, it goes relatively slowly, and then it parks up. And we're all just left completely blue-balled. Can you imagine how the Spanish were feeling on that day? They must have been absolutely gutted. Because the Spanish media got so hyped up about this, they tracked the DHL lorry that came off the plane that delivered the car. And the Alonso hype? Even more apparent, especially since media swarmed Fernando as he arrived at the circuit, with him looking really cool and collected as usual, stating, "Oh yes, we probably do a few laps." Well, that checked out, didn't it? They only did a few laps. And as for the rest of the world, we got the shape and the mystery from the black livery, but we didn't get any proof. And even Sky Sports came out to mention overcoming gremlins overnight could be crucial to allowing a full day on Friday, which tells you the public story is still, we need to sort out something. So Aston have accidentally landed on a kind of reverse sandbagging in a way, that they hid the car's behaviour that little bit longer. They did enough to show that they have a car, just not one ready to pound the circuit yet. And that can be a blessing when you're doing something radical and you don't want the paddock forming a consensus about whether it looks stable or scary. And yes, this may look completely overblown in a couple of weeks' time when we get to Bahrain, and this is just ancient history, but we're talking about how we're feeling today, right now, after weeks of no Formula 1 content. We're all gagging for Formula 1 content. We want to know where the hierarchy is and where Aston Martin is. So I'm just delivering you a service right now. I'm not giving you hindsight at the moment. That's for future law to deal with. And that's for future you to chastise me about in the comments. And yes, we do have to bring Mercedes into this, because I do think there is another overarching story here, that there are multiple teams courting a certain driver, and they are doing so not with talk of money or prestige or glory. They're talking about the brass tacks, which is engineering accomplishment, and what Mercedes have done this week has been nothing short of incredible. And kind of out of character. The way that Russell and Antonelli have been talking are like people who've already found the basic functions of the car and are now wanting to find pure pace, with George saying the only important unknown they've got left is the speed rather than the function of the car. And it feels really weird because in the past, even when they were quick, they tended to be really dour and stoic and really pessimistic. But maybe this flaunting we've seen is a side effect of competence. A car that has done itself justice in its first week of existence with no major headlines attached to it, unlike their rivals who have had at least one issue dog them throughout the last few days. And it helps that Mercedes posted the fastest times. And yes, I know lap times don't matter. But George being the first driver out of anyone to break into the 116s does show a sign of intent. It is a statement. It forces everyone else to really consider whether or not they want to choose cleverness when it comes to testing, or they would rather chase stability. And in the case of Aston Martin, they chose to be clever gits. Would Adrian Newey love to build the most Adrian Newey car out there to one of the best generational talents left on the grid? Absolutely he would. Is there a world where the AMR26 is partly a recruitment poster? Absolutely as well, for drivers and engineers, because that is exactly what Aston Martin is hoping for, that next year, 2027, will be the year where they really arrive. A desire to prove to the grid and to people that might be seeking employment elsewhere that they can actually produce a concept which is truly 100% their own, with a works partnership with an engine supplier that only they have the rights to use the power unit. They're no longer buying an engine from Mercedes, they're no longer copying concepts from Mercedes. The pink Mercedes days are gone. The green Red Bull days are gone. This design that they have is theirs and theirs alone. And that hopefully things will only continue to improve from here. An elite driver, like say Max Verstappen, would want a team that can turn a problem into a solution. And the reason Mercedes look interesting right now is exactly that. They look like a group that can do the basics in their sleep. In this case, Aston needs to show that same institutional calm, because Newey brilliance is not enough on its own in 2026, and Papa Stroll himself has openly acknowledged that there will be reliability issues, and that tackling a new chassis and power unit together is unprecedentedly hard. That is quite modest for the Canadian billionaire who really likes to blow his own trumpet. And what this all tells me is that he understands that there will be issues further down the road, but one thing that will not be tolerated will be repeated issues. So okay, how does Aston Martin turn things around after a really awkward Thursday debut? Well, simple. They just have a really boring Friday where there are no issues at all, where Alonso gets out there and gets the laps in, there are no stoppages, get maybe, I don't know, 120 laps on the board. That would be great to improve their tally. I mean, it's not going to be troubling the front runners because they've been able to amass way more laps than they could ever. But for Honda, at least they would have had something, because if they remain in double figures for the team and the power unit supplier, that's not good, especially since Red Bull Ford were able to generate more than 600 plus laps and then simply use Alonso for the driver that he is, brutally honest, and take his word for gospel, because Lance really didn't get away in edgeways other than just saying, oh, you know, the car felt good, that's all he could say. Alonso has a way of being able to show instability that engineers will be able to fully understand. And when they can't understand, he will say it in a language where we can all understand and log it into the Alonso radio archive for posterity. And that could be really vital for a car which may have a narrow operating window by design, and that will really matter for the optics of Lance going forward into 2026, because he's going to have a very, very solid year. He has to be right on the back of Fernando at worst. And I don't mean this in a petty way. This is a new generation of car, and Stroll barely running on the debut day means he starts the season's learning curve behind his own teammate, and the public debate becomes unfairly simple. That Fernando will be carrying development for the car whilst Lance is only along for the ride. Yeah, that storyline's gotten lazy, I getcha. But it's the sort of lazy that does stick. And that's why Thursday stung. They are a team, Aston, that adores controlling the narrative, and Thursday was the opposite of control. They turned up late, showed a wild machine, and then stopped almost immediately and killed the mood. But what can we infer about the concept itself, purely from these early descriptions and limited photography, and not take the stoppage into account? Well, it's all designed around airflow being valuable everywhere. You know, whilst other teams, as I've talked about throughout this week and the week before, are maybe going a different way, that maybe energy management between the combustion unit and the battery might be the ticket to ultimate glory. Newey here may be going a little bit old school by just relying on the aero more, because you've only got to look at the darn thing and realise that, hey, Adrian's been really earning his paycheck, hasn't he? Because look at the extreme undercut, the short, narrow side pods, the narrow rear bodywork. Also, the downforce devices can work in better conditions, and this being stuff we normies can see. It's more easily able to generate headlines on hype, because a fast-looking car could be fast by nature. Then Aston are probably chasing a very specific balance trade. When you make the midsection that slim, you usually do it because you want more rear load without making it too draggy down the straights. And that's important considering that Lando Norris mentioned the other day, these cars can reach speeds exceeding 210 miles an hour more quickly than before. And then the suspension geometry notes are telling. Anderson mentions very high top wishbones and pushrod layouts. Racing News 365 talks about a rear wishbone arrangement that promotes anti-squat, meaning Aston are trying to be very heavy-handed in dictating how the car sits on the road and moves around it. Because all of this aero work won't count for toffee if the car isn't predictable and drivable, and Fernando, he will tell you if it's not predictable, very clearly, very passionately. So the story of the AMR26 could easily be that, yeah, the engine may not be the best, but when it comes to aerodynamics, it could be one of the most efficient and one of the most controlled cars out there. Stable, but maybe somewhat throttled by its power unit, which could be a complete carbon copy of Red Bull's 2014 season. And this car having packaging so tight, it left everything on a knife edge where only perfection mattered. It's also in a weird way a compliment to the ambition that Aston Martin has right now in trying to do the impossible and get the car out there and saying, hey, we were able to do this, whereas just a couple of years ago, we wouldn't have come close to being able to have done this. The achievement in of itself is something that they can easily trumpet, because you see Mike Crack just absolutely emotional, almost tearing up in seeing that car actually hit the track for the very first time. It was a monumental occasion, but all of this daring do may not amount to anything if they haven't solved the correlation issue, or at least have not got it under control, because it has ruined their seasons at least twice in recent memory, and the last thing that Aston Martin needs right now is just to repeat the same darn thing, for both Fernando's sake and the boys' sake. Because if they come up with overheating issues with this design, they may have to make some compromises to ensure that cooling isn't a problem anymore, or something that they can manage. If there are problems with the power unit in that it's not integrated fully, then that could easily cost them days. But so far, based on how I'm recording and how I'm editing, I've not heard any red flags for Fernando out there, so, that's, slow and steady. But yes, the sport does not wait, because all the other power unit suppliers are putting in some really solid laps. And yes, Audi is absolutely having a bit of a tumultuous time of it, but even they are able to get the car out there, and they have pumped out more laps than any of the constructors were able to do in the first tests of 2014. So those spectres that they were really worried about have not come to bear. And they were all able to do this over the course of 3 days. And Aston Martin, well, they're only going to get one. But the upside of all of this is that Aston Martin may arrive at Bahrain with a car that may still look quite bold and weird compared to the competition, but it might be a car that makes a little bit more sense. And that's the thing with some of Newey's concepts over the years. They could look really radical and strange initially, but as things progress and they get results, they become less weird. They almost become the norm, or the gold standard. Well, I mean, not always. We've got to remember the MP418 of 2003. But let's just say that Adrian's track record allows for more success than failure. So Aston Martin's Tricky Thursday could be considered a way of them going to the extreme and trying to win this brand new era with a concept that no one has thought about. Because I saw that one picture of it exiting the pits and looking like it's got some sort of spine attached to the bottom. I mean, those little aero rakes, what on earth are those things? Those are really intriguing. Is this an absolute gem that Adrian has discovered, as well as other things? Only time will tell. And whether or not teams decide to go ahead and copy it. Because this concept looks like it's trading reliability for authority. That they just gotta go for it. They have just got to really throw everything, even the kitchen sink, at this car and try and get some sort of understanding about it. It may break, it may be one of the least reliable cars on the grid, but it could easily be one of the fastest. And that stoppage on Thursday may prove that they are being very protective, that they know this car is very temperamental and fragile, and that anything that may go as close to a complete bust has to be managed carefully. Because as we've seen with all of the other teams, they can just keep going and going and going. They've got it down. Are they leaving things on the table? Probably. Whereas Aston Martin, well, they're certainly looking very spicy. They've captured everyone's attention. But I think for Aston, it would have been so much better if that failure happened without us seeing it, without the eyes of the world on this circuit, Formula One promoting it like it were a standard test, but it actually isn't. In short, this really should have been the private test that these teams thought that they would be getting, when they clubbed together and paid the Circuit de Catalunya. We did see it from a guy up a tree, as we've grown accustomed to the last few days, and they just got to live with it. The kind of thing that Williams chose to opt out of, the sight of a stranded car, which is exactly what happened with Aston. And that's the irony. The most valuable upgrade that Aston Martin could gain in 2026 is not something that they can gain from the car, but maybe emotional control. Being able to handle themselves well in this learning year and understanding themselves and not being nearly as delusional as they have been, saying, oh, Lance, there's nothing wrong with Lance. He's absolutely fine. How dare you be mean to Lance? Or trying to sugarcoat things. What I'm seeing from Aston right now is relatively restrained. That, sure, they love to show off. It's part of their nature. Look at their facility. It's absolutely remarkable. But one thing they are starting to realize with Honda's insight is that the road to success is really, really difficult, and it comes with its own challenges. It seems like they've actually taken quite a few doses of humility, including Papa Stroll, which in of itself is quite a noble feat. No mean feat, even. And one thing that could prove this is treating this red flag incident as something akin to a no biggie. Because in a sport where everyone can smell nerves, being calm can become a very powerful performance metric. So no, I'm not saying Aston are in trouble. I'm only saying that Thursday made them look like they were. And sometimes in F1, that's almost as damaging. So let's see how Friday shapes up, okay? One full day of Alonso mileage will tell us which world we're in. Either this car gets with the program like everyone else is on, albeit with far less mileage than they probably would have liked, or it remains for a while longer a beautiful looking question mark. And we fans, we love question marks. But when it comes to championships, they're one with answers. And one answer to your question about what to watch next is right here. You should really check this video out because, well, we recommend it. I'll see you over there. In fact, race ya!